Hi folks, Mark here from SeaWild Earth, and today I'm going to be sharing with you some tips and tricks for your ocean and coastal photography that I hope will allow you to take your imaging to the next level. Let's get into it. Okay, well, the first thing I want to talk about is the lowly tripod. Now, as photographers, we pride ourselves on going out and buying the best and cameras, lenses, and all of the accessories so that we can, I just got the Sony or the Canon or whatever, just so that you know that you've got great equipment. And it just seems to be that a lot of people at the end of the day, once they've bought all their filters, their lenses, their cameras, etc., that's when they decide, with the change that they've got left, which tripod they're going to use. I look at it a different way. Especially if you're going to be using photography as a means to earn a living and to support a family, your photography relies on stability and a good tripod, okay? There's absolutely nothing worse than getting home and seeing that maybe that loose-fitting tripod connector or the tripod bracket holder or whatever has been shaking around in the heavy wind that you've just been photographing in, and your images are useless, can't be used. Okay, so it's much better to spend quite a bit of money, I believe, on a decent tripod than anything else. Now, I am going to be mentioning some brands throughout this video. Nobody has sponsored me to make this film. Everything that I say is based on my experiences with this equipment, and the equipment that I use is stuff that's been researched heavily so that I know that what I'm buying and what I'm spending my hard-earned money on is going to serve me well, not just for now, but into the future. I love stuff that is durable, that will stand the test of time. Currently, leg-wise, for still photography, because I also have a different tripod for video, I use from Leo Photo, the LS324CEX. It's a set of carbon fiber legs. They extend to about 6 feet. It's crazy, or just over 6 feet. And then on top of that, I've got a quick leveling base, again, which I'll touch on in very briefly. Is you can unlock it and you've got that certain amount of play, about 15 degrees each way, so that it's much easier just to set your legs, level the base very quickly rather than mess around with the legs, and then your job done. On top of that, I've got the LH55, again from Leo Photo, a very, very solid ball head that locks in. It can hold a payload of 55 pounds. Which is more than enough for my little 5DSR with whatever lens I decide to put on it. But it's absolutely solid, and it gives me the confidence to know that whatever condition and whatever position I put it in, it's going to be rock solid, it's going to be dependable, it's going to get the job done. And that, at the end of the day, is what we're all after. Now, at one point, because we are going to be using this in the salty ocean environment, I normally strip this thing down once a month, give it a good old clean, and same with the head, strip all that down. And it's the same with anything that is going to be bearing the brunt of the environment when you're out shooting the coastal area. Your camera, your lenses, your filters especially, all need to be cleaned. And one thing with regards to cleaning filters, which we'll go on to in a minute, always rinse them first before you rub anything off, because those very fine particles of salt that are going to be in this ocean air, okay, over time, if you don't rinse them off first, eventually you're going to start getting scratches all on the surface, and it's going to start to deteriorate from the quality of the images that you get. Okay, so just a quick tip, just rinse them off with a bit of water, carry a little squeegee of water with you, spray them off first, and then get rid of the water from them that way. Okay, job done. But always, always, please do make sure you invest in a good tripod. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about are filters. Okay, and what do I mean by that? When you start working with the ocean as a subject, or coastline, or waterfalls, or liquid in general, what you're going to find is that the ocean, for example, and a good example is what we have behind us today, is that the ocean generally tends to be darker than the sky. All right. Now, if you want to have detail and so people can see the elements of the ocean that you're photographing, what you're going to want to do is to find a way to be able to balance up the light on your subject. And we do that by using what are called graduated neutral density filters. Okay, and as you can see by this one, there's a dark area at the top and a light area at the bottom. Quite simply, all we do is we mask the sky by placing that in our filter holder, okay, which is another piece of equipment that fits onto the front of the lens. Okay, and then we just lower that until it masks out the sky. And because the sky is darker, we need to expose it correctly, so that means we can either slow down our shutter or open up our aperture so that the ocean remains nicely exposed and we're not overexposing the sky because it's hidden behind this dark area here. Okay, now I'm not going to go too much into ND filters, etc., in this video, but if you want to find out more about using ND filters and how you go about long exposure photography in much greater detail, check out this video here. Now, beyond neutral density filters, there is another filter that you should get used to using, and that is a polarizing filter. Now, a polarizing filter removes glare and reflection, especially from wet rocks if you're photographing a particularly rocky area on a shoreline, and also if you're photographing like a waterfall. Now, what that does is by polarizing the light, it will just get rid of that glare, and it is very much better to use this when the sunlight or the light source is perpendicular to the camera. It doesn't work that well if you're shooting into the sunlight or with the sun behind you. It's much better if they're perpendicular, so at 90 degrees to the camera. All right, and then you can rotate that. What you'll find on any polarizing lens is you've got the part that fits into the thread of the lens, and then you have a rotating bezel that allows the glass to rotate in order for you to find what is called the polarizing point. And at that point, that is when you can remove or add the glare or reflection to whatever it is that you're photographing. Okay, and this incidentally is the only filter that cannot be replicated in post-production. So this should be the first filter on your list, followed very closely, hopefully, by that graduated filter. And then beyond that, you then go into full NDs, which are again outlined in much greater detail in that video that I just mentioned. Okay, now one aspect with a polarizing filter also that you should bear in mind is that you can see that they are a little bit darker, so they do reduce the amount of light going into your camera by a value relative to about 3/4 to maybe 1, or maybe even slightly over 1 aperture value of light. So that needs to be taken into consideration when you want to work with ND filters and you're looking to reach a specific shutter speed in order to create a certain effect. So the characteristic of the ND filter needs to be added to the polarizing filter, sorry, needs to be added to the ND filters in order for you to land on the amount of ND filtration that you desire. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at is timing. Okay, timing when you take your photograph. What a lot of people do, I believe, is they fall into the habit of, let's take this rock here for example, although there's not much activity in the waves today. What a lot of people generally tend to do is they wait for the wave to hit like that, and that's when they take the photograph. What I find, especially when the ocean is maybe a little bit agitated, is the amount of white water that's created at that point of impact what that does is that creates a big white area of water, and especially if you're using a shutter speed of around about 1.6 seconds, which again is my favorite shutter speed, especially when working with agitated and moving water, and again it's something that can be explained here. I prefer to work with that slower shutter speed, normally in the middle of the day using like an ND64, ND1000, something like that. Okay, but what I find is the most effective method to getting really nice, slow, long exposure photographs when working with agitated water in a particularly rocky area is I wait for the water to come in like this, and it creates that white water around it, but it's when the water then starts to recede back away from the object before another wave comes in, that by taking the photograph at that point, when the water reaches its top point and starts to run back, what you'll find is that the water, as it escapes around the object, it creates these really beautiful lines, and they can be used also as leading lines to take your viewer's eye from that close anchor point in the foreground, which would be, for example, this rock, and then that would create really nice lines that would then go off towards the ocean. Maybe there's a sunset in the corner, a little bit like this photograph that I took just along the coast here, using that very same technique. So as you can see, it just creates a really nice aesthetic, as opposed to all the water being in one point. When it runs away like that, it just creates a really nice effect. Okay, so shutter speeds. What kind of shutter speeds are we looking at here? Well, it all depends really. If you want to take photographs of nice crisp waves, or surfers doing a top turn, or some kind of maneuver on the top of a wave and creating a nice spray, if you want to have that all nice and sharp, then obviously your shutter speed needs to be quite elevated. If I'm going after shots like that, what I would normally set my camera up in is in aperture priority. I know the depth of field I want to get, but what I would then do is I'll bump up the ISO to more than would normally be required given the conditions of the day, and that way the camera is then forced to increase its shutter speed in order to expose correctly for that photograph. So let's say, for example, on a day like today, it's a little bit grey out. If I want to shoot at, say, f11, I'll bump up the ISO to maybe even 1250, something like that. And then that's going to give me an elevated shutter speed in order to get an exposed, a correctly exposed image. If it's a sunny day, I might back off a little bit. I might even increase my aperture a little bit. Go up to like f16, but still have a relatively high ISO so as to increase the shutter speed on a sunny day. That way you're ensured you're going to get nice long or nice sharp images. Now that also works the other way around. And what I mean by that is that by adding an ND filter onto your lens, you're effectively going to cut down the amount of light entering the lens. So therefore you're either going to have to open up your aperture, or you're going to have to elongate or lengthen your shutter in order to expose correctly. And what I prefer to do, especially if I'm working on a coastal shot, a landscape shot, is everything's going to be locked in manual, and what I will then do is I will try and hit my preferred shutter speed, which is 1.6 seconds. And then it depends which ND filter will allow me to get that, depending on the aperture that I've selected for the shot. If I'm working on f11, depending again if it's sunny, rainy, or if it's cloudy or sunny or whatever, that's going to determine which ND I'm going to have to use in order to be able to expose correctly at 1.6 seconds. And the reason that I opt for 1.6 seconds through trial and error over numerous years is that I found that that shutter speed allows me to create the feeling or the sense of dynamic motion when there is an agitated ocean that I'm photographing, or indeed it just gives that ability once we're editing the image to reduce a little bit our highlights, but still retain the mid-tones within the highlights to create that great and beautiful sense of motion within the image. So as you can see in those images, all of those images were shot using a shutter speed of 1.6 seconds. Now, beyond that, if you're panning and trying to get motion through a panning shot, which we'll touch on in a short while, what I generally try and do is get to a shutter speed of around about, I'd say maybe 1/10 at maximum, so 1/13, 1/15, maybe 1/20 of a second. And then depending on the speed of the pan, if you can keep your subject focused, then that will determine how streaky the background's going to be. But we're going to be touching on that, that technique in a short while. Okay folks, well, we've changed our location and I've come along to what is normally one of the surf spots in my local area, but as you can see today, we've got absolute pancakes, no waves around, but it allows me anyway to outline another aspect of ocean, coastal and even surf sport photography, and that is what is called the slow pan or the long exposure pan. Now, as you can see, I've changed the equipment. I've now got a zoom lens on. This is actually the Tamron 150-600 zoom. I've got it on my Canon EOS 5D Mark III. And I am using a tripod which is more for video as opposed to a still photography head, and the simple reason for that is that I can lock the action for the up and down tilt and release the action for the pan, so that all I have is the action to pan. And with a video tripod you normally get this little arm on it that allows you to have greater control over the panning. If you're on a regular photographic tripod, you release all of the brakes and you've then got the ball head to contend with, so the camera's going all over the place. If you can lock down the tilt aspect of the tripod and just work then with the panning aspect, you're in a much better place. Okay, now what is absolutely paramount is that the camera is nice and level. There are two spirit levels on this thing, one on the actual head of the tripod itself and then one again on my camera. So I've set everything so that I know that the camera is absolutely perfectly level. And now all you basically have to do is to put an ND filter on your lens so that you can achieve a nice slow shutter. If you're shooting in the middle of the day and you want to have an effective shutter speed of say 1.6 seconds, my favorite, you would need to put quite a heavy ND filter on this lens. Now the ND filter that fits this lens is a 95mm thread. It's not cheap. And then when you place on the polarizer on top of that, so you've got a 95mm polarizer and a 95mm ND6, 64, sorry, you're looking at an investment of about $300 just for those two filters of good, again, good quality. It's what my work relies on. And all I'm trying to do now with a nice wide open aperture, okay, is to create an image where I match the speed of the surfer or the object in my shutter or in my finder throughout the duration of that shutter speed. And again, what that is going to do is going to create a nice blurry effect to the background or the elements that that are still, and hopefully by panning and keeping my focus on the item that's moving, in this case a surfer or a bodyboarder, then that aspect of the shot will be nice and sharp, or parts of it, him, her, will be sharp, so that you then create a nice kind of artsy photograph with a exponent of a surf sport in your shot. Now I do have a couple of examples of this, but they're not my best ones yet. I've still yet to accomplish that, but hopefully it won't be too long. I'll be able to share with you a really nice long exposure panning shot, but as yet these are a couple of aspects or a couple of examples that I've accomplished over the last couple of days. Okay, well, as you can see, the results from that kind of shot, they can be pretty spectacular, they can be pretty wild, but what I tell people, and they can start to verge on what some people don't understand as an image, and what I tell everybody that I teach in photography is that you are shooting for you and only you. Don't shoot what you think people want to see, because that's not your interpretation of the scene in front of you. What you need to shoot is what appeals to your mind. And people say, yes, but how do I develop a following? Well, you develop a following by doing exactly that, because your images are going to appeal or not appeal to the wider public. And those who the images speak to more are going to become the core followers of your name, of your brand, of your photography, and hopefully they'll end up also being your customers. So don't think that you're getting too weird with your photography, especially when you start to do long exposure or even panning shots, because it is, at the end of the day, all art. Well, folks, and the last piece of gear that I think would stand you in good stead, it's hard because it may not be a piece of equipment that allows you to accomplish great photography, but it's certainly a piece of equipment that allows you to bring with you, obviously, what you need to take that photography. I am, of course, talking about your backpack, whichever camera bag it is that you choose to use. I'm using this, which is a Low Pro. It's the Pro Tracker AW350 or 550. Let me just check. Yep, 550 AW2, and it is something that is just absolutely stunning for the job that I do. I actually bought this because, again, like I say, it's not particularly cheap. I think this one's about 400 bucks. But the reason that I bought it is because I was away on a shoot, and like most people, I just scrimped a bit on the backpack side of things, not thinking that it was ever going to let me down. And I was actually away on a shoot on an island not far from here called Iriamote, and about 3/4 of the way through that shoot, unfortunately it was a sponsored shoot, so I was shooting photo and video for a client, but my backpack failed, and whereas I was walking every day with both video and camera gear, photographic gear, from that moment that it bust on me, which is about 1/3 of the way into the vacation or into the trek, I then had to choose from day one or from day to day what I was going to do, video or photo, but I couldn't film me with the proper gear, with the A7S II and all of the whistles and bells that goes with that. So from that point forth, I had to just use a lowly GoPro in order to make this customer video. Now, needless to say, it was okay, but they weren't particularly over the moon with it. Thankfully, I retained that sponsor, and everything turned out good. But again, your choice of bag depends on exactly what it is that you need out of your photography. I need it to go on treks and last multiple days in the jungle or in a coastal environment, so I really do need for it to stand up to the test of the environment and not fail on me that way. I'm happy with this. It is superb. I have actually made a video all about this bag that you can catch just up here. So please, if you haven't already, do subscribe, hit that little subscriptions button underneath, give the video a thumbs up, a like, and please also check out the comment section or the community section tab on the channel, because I am trying to develop that part of the channel a little bit more, get a bit more interaction beyond just the comments in the section of the videos. And apart from that, please do stay happy, stay safe, stay sane, and above all, head out there and take your photos. I'm sorry if you're picking up a bit of wind. The wind has picked up a little bit, and there has been some aircraft noise around, but that's part and parcel of us living here in Okinawa. So please do check out the next video, which hopefully won't be too long coming, and I will see you very, very soon. Take care.